I'm really thrilled to be talking to you. It really could not be coming at a better time, honestly. I have had so many discussions and have been through it myself, this whole fertility journey and this lack of information and education in women's health. And it's been one of those things where you learn like everything after the fact and you're like, I just wish I would have known. And so I just feel like you are one of the women that's pioneering, educating and empowering because we need this information out there. And I'm in this place right now. It's like, had I known certain things,
Mhm.
the last 5 years would have been totally different and I could have done so many different things. So I guess I first just want to start off by telling us just your personal experience and how that then helped you launch what you're doing now with Allara Health.
Yeah, sure. I'm really excited to be here and chat about all things fertility, hormone health, women's health. I think, kind of to exactly what you were saying, it's something that needs so much more awareness and education around it. And I'm always excited to talk more about it. So I'm the founder of Allara Health. We are an expert medical care platform that helps women solve all of their hormonal health needs. So that includes everything from really in-depth testing to medication management, ongoing chronic care management, nutrition therapy, kind of all the different puzzle pieces you might need to help get to the root cause of some of your hormonal health issues,
Mhm.
and help solve them. And also, just like you were talking about, one thing that is so core to everything we do at Alara is not waiting until, way down the line when you're ready to get pregnant to actually solve some of your problems, but to really start investigating and digging into them and fixing them whenever you're ready to start.
Mhm.
And so that actually was something that I really noticed in my personal health journey that was so frustrating was that it really felt like for me, nobody really wanted to treat me if I wasn't ready to get pregnant. It was almost like women's health was just fertility care and pregnancy care. And if you have any needs beyond that, that isn't like your annual checkup and your annual pap smear, like best of luck to you. Please come back later.
It's so true. I mean, I didn't really have any issues, but now that you say that, when I think about being like 20 all the way up to early 30s before I got pregnant, there was no conversation about
Mhm.
fertility or thinking about getting pregnant or what my hormones looked like or what inside of my body looked like. And that's the time that you're supposed to start. I mean, now we know that you want to start thinking about freezing eggs and everything. So that's so true. And I didn't even think about that until you just said that. There's like this whole
Yeah.
span of time in women's life, like 15 to 20 years, where no one's really looking at your female parts
Yeah.
inside. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was something. So I actually was diagnosed. So I was diagnosed with polycystic ovary syndrome or
Okay.
PCOS
Okay.
about like 12 years ago at this point. And I was actually diagnosed on a total fluke. Like I was trying to figure out some stomach issues, ended up getting an ultrasound for these stomach issues. And it was actually or a sonogram, one of the two. And it was
Mhm.
actually the sonographer who said, you have PCOS. And the thing is, because I didn't look like I had kind of textbook PCOS, I didn't have the acne, I didn't have some of the hair issues, I didn't have things that you could see out on the
Mhm.
outside.
Mhm.
Nobody ever looked into it for me. No doctor ever asked me, like, are your periods regular? Which they weren't. They were crazy and all over the place.
Interesting.
And so we actually hear a lot that, for example, patients with PCOS, a lot of them only end up finding out that they have this condition when they start fertility treatments or when they start trying to get pregnant. And then, they're trying for 6 months, it's not working. And then they end up in the endocrinologist's office. And that's when they finally find out. But to exactly your point, like, had they known earlier, they might have made different choices or
Right.
they might have started trying earlier, or there could have maybe been interventions. And I think that's what gets really tough is like it almost becomes so much on the patient to advocate, especially if you don't see symptoms on the outside.
Yeah.
But to your point, it might have been that like nothing was going wrong, but you still had something underlying going on that you might have wanted to know about.
Yeah, well, that's what's so hard. It puts this patient in the position to be like their own manager of all their health when they don't even know exactly what
Right.
to look for or cannot connect to what's happening on inside if there aren't symptoms on the outside. So like how early can you screen for something like PCOS?
Yeah. So most patients with some sort of a hormonal condition, normally those symptoms tend to onset during puberty. And so, for example, you might notice when puberty hits, your periods, it's a year or two into starting to get your period and they're still really irregular. And I think the other thing that's tough is sometimes they can feel just like puberty symptoms, like maybe acne is just puberty or maybe it's a hormonal issue. It's kind of hard to tell. So normally hormonal issues start around puberty. But like really when you can kind of start to tell, okay, it's not just puberty, it's something else going on, is more like in your late teens, early 20s. So for example, you might hear women say like, well, I got to college and I didn't gain the freshman 15, I gained the freshman 50.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody told me it was, just that I need to eat healthier. But it turns out that I had a hormonal imbalance or I had PCOS that just nobody diagnosed me with until, I was 30.
Right.
And so a lot of times those symptoms are kind of showing up earlier. But really the two times women tend to get diagnosed with these types of conditions are, one, like in their early 20s, again, if you have, like I have a dad who's a doctor, maybe if you have doctors in your family who can help
Right.
advocate for you, or you
Mm-hmm.
happen to have a really great doctor who can put things together for you. Or actually, we see a lot of women get diagnosed with hormonal issues around the time that they start trying to have a child. And that's
Right.
when these things like finally get uncovered.
Right. So, like in real life, who should the doctor be that is managing this for us? Like before Allara Health existed, like who's the doctor that should be asking these questions and then like guiding us through this? Like who's not doing their job here?
Yeah. So I always like to say it's not necessarily the doctor's fault. It
Yeah,
might
I
be
know.
the
I
format
we always
in which they're practicing.
mhm. Totally. I know.
But like I get why it's so frustrating. Trust me, I've been so frustrated myself. So like theoretically, an OBGYN is really well equipped to answer a lot of these questions. But the reality of practicing in an OBGYN's office, which I happen to know really well because my dad's an OBGYN,
Okay.
is that they're often seeing, 5 or 6 patients an hour. They're going like from room to room. They're already running behind. They're really in a lot of ways like a lot of people's primary care doctors. So
Mhm.
they're doing your annual checkup. Maybe they're giving you some vaccines. They're doing your pap smear. They're doing your breast exam. Like by the time all of that is done, they really don't have time to sit down and be like, okay, tell me about like how you've been feeling. Have you been feeling like fatigued, brain fog? Have you noticed weird acne? Have you noticed weird weight gain? Like they just don't have time and it's not their fault, but they
Right.
just really don't.
Right.
And, theoretically, reproductive endocrinologists would be, so those are normally fertility doctors,
Mhm.
are also really well trained in a lot of these hormonal health conditions. But the reality is, we only have about 1,500 reproductive endocrinologists in all of the United States. And we don't really even have enough going around to do all of the, IVF, egg freezing, all of those fertility procedures that need to get done. So they just don't have time either. And so really what we're solving with Allara is two things. It's one, finding doctors who care enough to ask the right questions, to dig in, who have the expertise to help put those puzzle pieces together.
Mhm.
But two, we're also giving them a different type of practice setting. So instead of being, in an office where you're running from room to room every 10 minutes, everything is virtual. So it's really convenient for both the patient and for the provider. Providers have, much longer visit times. They have 30-minute initial visits with patients. They're really only focused on those hormonal health needs. They're not, also trying to do all these other primary
Right.
care tests.
They're specialists.
Exactly. They're really specialists in hormone health and women's health and in helping you really get to the root cause of some of what's going on. And then
Mhm.
the other thing we do is we let specialists be specialists in what they were trained in. So, for a lot of women with hormonal health needs, actually diet and nutrition can be a really important part of therapy.
Mhm.
But doctors are not trained in this, and expecting them to do nutrition therapy on top of everything else is, I think, just really unrealistic. And
Mhm.
so at Allara, for example, we not only have OBGYNs and endocrinologists, but we also have registered dietitians that patients can meet with so that, when you're with your doctor, you're focused just on that really medical side of things. And with your nutritionist, you can focus on nutrition therapy side of things. And behind the scenes, they're collaborating and working with each other.
Of
But you
course.
as a patient have to put all this together. Everything's just kind of there for you.
Right. That makes so much sense. I mean, I've been working with a nutritionist like alongside my
Hmm.
my fertility doctor, and that has obviously been really, really helpful. But it would be so great to have it all in one place. So you got diagnosed with PCOS and when you said you were how old?
I was about 20.
You were about 20 years old when you got okay. And like what does that diagnosis look like for you? Like what does then the next
Mhm.
like what's the journey for you after that?
So, yeah, I think that's kind of what is so frustrating. What was so frustrating to me, and I think what is so frustrating to a lot of women who get diagnosed with gynecologic or hormonal conditions, whether it's, PCOS, endometriosis, hypothyroidism. I think we kind of have this sense of like, okay, I'm going to get a diagnosis and then there's going to tell me exactly what to do and there's going to be a plan and everything's going to get fixed.
Mhm.
And actually, the reality of what happened is I got my diagnosis and then I just kind of like meandered around the health system trying to figure things out for myself for 10 years. I think what I experienced and what a lot of other women experience are number one, hearing things like, well, if you don't want to get pregnant, I don't know what to do for you because
Right.
again, a lot of doctors think that that's like your only option. Meanwhile, they probably should have been having conversations with me earlier on about, well, regardless of when you want to get pregnant, let's start planning ahead about your fertility journey because
Right.
that's going to be more challenging and there might be different decisions you want to make earlier on, like freezing your eggs. I also, was bouncing around to a lot of different doctors. So I would go to like the dermatologist for acne and I would go to the OBGYN for my birth control. And maybe, I'd go to the reproductive endocrinologist like one time with one who would see me, but everything felt very like I was just putting a lot of puzzle pieces
Piecemeal.
together
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah. And you were managing it, which we're not really capable of doing.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
And so I always say, I'm like, literally, the reason I started a company was because I wanted something better for myself. I just became such a frustrated patient that I kept just waiting and waiting. Like, surely there is something better out there for
Hmm.
women's healthcare. Like, surely there must be some solution that I'm just missing. And I just kept not finding it. And so I just honestly got so frustrated that I built what I was looking for myself and what it turns out a lot of my friends were looking for and a lot of other women I talked to were looking for. I just kind of built it from a patient's perspective.
That's amazing. And what were those steps that you took for yourself to prepare yourself for fertility, or what have you done to take care of yourself?
So I think in a lot of ways, I think a lot of people get a diagnosis like PCOS or endometriosis. And especially if you're, in your early 20s, like I was, it can be really terrifying. Like I remember thinking, oh my God, will I ever be able to have kids? Does this
Yeah.
mean I'm infertile? I think a
Yeah.
lot of people have that fear, but I actually really want to reframe it as it actually was such a powerful tool for me to have that information. Like I always think, what if I hadn't gotten that diagnosis and then, I started trying in my 30s or late 30s and then I had to do something about it and what if I had less options or what if things were too late? Like I feel so lucky actually that I got to start like as stressful as it was to be thinking about infertility in your
Hmm.
early and mid 20s. I actually am really grateful that I got to start thinking about it earlier and start to have those conversations and start to plan ahead. So one big step I took for myself actually was I froze my eggs last year.
Hmm. Amazing.
One fun fact about egg freezing that I think a lot of people don't know is you actually have a lot more time than you think to freeze
Okay.
your eggs. And this is actually why I think it's so helpful to get testing done. So, for example, at Allara, we test every single patient for a marker called AMH,
Uh-huh.
which is kind of an indicative level of your ovarian reserve of kind of how many eggs roughly you might have. And so, for example, if you're earlier in your 20s and we see a really low AMH, we might say, okay, think about egg freezing sooner
Hmm.
because you might have less quantity and we need to get you in sooner to think about that.
Hmm.
But if you have a normal or even an elevated AMH, like we see in a lot of PCOS patients, actually, my fertility doctor told me that a lot of his patients really don't need to freeze their eggs until 35. Like you actually have a
Interesting.
lot more time than you think. But again, that's why it's so important to have the information, go get the test, get your AMH levels tested, see if you're, normal, if something is off and you want to go in sooner.
Right.
But kind of armed with that information, I decided to freeze my eggs last year when I was 33. And I'm just like really glad that I did that. I think it's just taken a huge burden off of me, especially
Hmm.
knowing that, I probably will have fertility issues. I probably will need some sort of help getting pregnant.
Well, don't say that. Don't, I mean, it's obviously like you,
Statistically.
statistically totally fair,
Yes.
but I'm like such a believer, obviously, in, saying like manifesting what will happen or what you want to
Oh,
happen.
okay. I love
But
that.
like, how was I mean, I went through the egg freezing situation as well. How was that for you? How like emotionally, physically, how was that 2-week process for you?
So I'll say I'm like a total science nerd, especially when it comes to all things like women's health. Like part of me's like, I should have just gone to med school and like been an OBGYN.
Yeah.
So I
It's
actually
not
really
too
loved
late.
it. Like I was like nerding out, like looking at like the ultrasound screen, being like, ooh, like how my ovaries looking, like what's going on.
Uh-huh.
So I was just like really honestly fascinated by the idea that like science has come this far that we can do these really incredible things. I will say obviously it was pretty tough for a few weeks. Like, the daily injections were tough. By the end, my stomach was just like literally covered in bruises.
Mhm.
I was so bloated. I had to like hold my stomach up as if I was like pregnant to walk around.
Ugh.
And that kind of lasted for a few weeks after. But with all those side effects and everything, like to me, it just felt totally worth it to have the peace of mind of like, okay, I have this step, I have another option. Like it just felt very empowering to me to feel like I took a step for
Yeah,
myself.
that's so amazing. And how does Allara Health like support those going through the egg freezing journey?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing is having somebody to talk to before you're even ready to start on your fertility journey who
Mhm.
can help guide you.
Mhm.
I think that's another thing that's really missing in our healthcare system today is if you're ready to start going on that fertility journey, great. You can call up, make an appointment with the fertility doctor. They'll do a consult with you. But if you call up a fertility clinic and say like, well, I'm just kind of like thinking through things, who can give me an opinion? They're going to say, come back when you're actually ready to do a serious consult, because again, there just are not enough of them in the country. And so I think where we play a really valuable role for patients is really having a really unbiased and science-based conversation with them
Yeah.
about how should you think about your fertility. So for example, any patient can sign up to talk to one of our doctors, do a 30-minute visit with them, go through kind of everything they're thinking through, all of their medical history. In most cases, actually, these visits are also covered by insurance. So it's really cost effective for a lot of patients. And then we send you out for very extensive lab tests. So we're testing everything from, all of your hormone levels. Are we seeing an issue with your thyroid? Are we seeing something like PCOS? How does your AMH level look? Like, where is that level? And then once those results are back, you get another video visit with the provider to go through all the results in really in-depth detail,
Okay.
and come up with a game plan from there.
But
And
no
so
ultrasound involved in that.
we can send you out for an
Oh,
ultrasound. So
you
we don't
can.
always
Okay.
need to.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if we don't always need to, but if you need an ultrasound, we can send you out for one. We'll find a lab that's covered by your insurance. You'll go get that ultrasound. And then again, your doctor will review everything with you
So amazing.
via video. And so it's just this really like, all right, we have all of the tools you need, right? We have all of
Yeah.
your lab tests. We have the ultrasound if you need it. We have all of your medical history, and we can have a really in-depth and again, unbiased conversation with you about, based off everything we're seeing, what would we recommend to do next? Do you recommend like do nothing, sit and think about it for a year? Are we like, you really need to see somebody, in which case we'll help make the referral and find you the right provider. So I think it's really about like having that conversation with the patient with all of the information you need to make an educated
Yeah.
decision.
I feel like looking back on my journey, this is like exactly what was missing for me, because it's like I go to this place now because I was just diagnosed with something like a birth defect called a congenital uterine septum,
Mhm.
where have you heard of that?
No, I haven't
No.
heard of that.
Okay, so it's like where my uterus is a little bit misshaped, like basically where the embryo is supposed to implant, it like dips and it doesn't really
Oh, yes.
provide like a cozy spot for the embryo
Uh-huh.
to stay. So that is a reason for like my multiple miscarriages, but I never was told to get this certain test at the radiologist until just like a month ago, even though I've had miscarriages for the past 5 years.
Mm.
And my fertility doctor was even like ready to implant me and like didn't know that I had this, So I have like been doing so much thinking about it and going through all these different emotions,
Yeah.
right? Like anger and sadness and what could I
Yeah.
have done and what did my doctor do wrong? And like this conversation is just so helpful because it's helping me reframe it like no one did anything wrong. Like my doctor didn't
Mhm.
do anything wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. Like I wasn't supposed to know this, but I could have used someone like an advocate and a specialist in this space
Mhm.
that could have probably guided me and told me more tests to take beyond just the fertility doctor who is there to, like you said, like he's there to do his job in a very specific and timely way. And I
Mhm.
can't fault him for that. Like we
Yeah.
all have to do that. We all have to time manage and like, pick what we invest energy and time into. Like I can't blame him. So anyways, I think what you're doing is so amazing. And I think that it is so beneficial for women, like you said, not only who are just starting to go through fertility, but even more importantly, early 20s. Like, do you even see women in their teens starting to sign up with you? Yeah, I bet. Like,
Yeah, we do. And it's so interesting. We actually have been so right now we don't treat women under 18. I think we're going to
okay,
actually open it up a bit because we're getting a lot of moms reaching out to us
I
who are like, my
bet.
daughter's 16. She's just been diagnosed. Like, I don't know what to do for her. Can you please help? Yeah, it's like really, in a lot of ways, actually, it's almost like on the one hand, I'm so happy to see how many people we can help, but it's
Hmm.
also like so sad sometimes to see how little there is out
I
there for a
know.
lot of these people.
I know.
And I think it's so interesting what you said too. And I'm so sorry to hear about, your 5 years of your journey that you've had to go through.
Thank
But
you.
I think what I find frustrating sometimes in the conversations about women's health is like, we always say like, well, women need to be more educated. We need to give them
Uh-huh.
more education and like arm them with more information. But that just kind of in a lot of ways puts the burden on us to figure it out for ourselves versus like, we really need doctors who can help figure it out for us in a lot of
Right.
ways. Like education is great, but the burden shouldn't be on us to figure it
No,
out for
no,
ourselves.
no. It's like the education, like the onus needs to be on them and they need to be the one asking the questions because that's what they're trained to do. Like it can't be so surface. But that's when it gets so hard as a patient. It feels like you just need a specialist for everything,
Right.
and then that starts to get expensive and exhausting. And then your time
Mhm.
managing that. And what would you say? Like, what does your team of kind of like doctors look like?
So I'd say that's kind of, you just said like exactly what we aim to do for patients. We really are women's health specialists. So
Hmm.
we really want to be the place that you can go where, if you have any kind of specialty care need in women's health that doesn't fit into that clean box of you're at your annual OBGYN checkup or you're in a fertility treatment,
Hmm.
we want to be that place you can come to with any of those care needs or concerns. So, you feel like something's off and you want to get your hormones tested, you can come to us for that. You want to
Hmm.
have a conversation about your fertility options and you want some testing to help you make the best decisions, we can help you with that.
Hmm.
You need chronic care management for a condition like PCOS or hypothyroidism, we can help you with that. And if we don't know, if we can't help you ourselves, we'll help you find the best place to go. So we'll
Right.
refer you to the right provider. We'll help advocate for you in the health system. We really view ourselves as kind of like that, almost filling in that care gap of women's specialty care is really how we think about ourselves.
It's so important because, and even like the age gap, thinking from teens even to like coming into my age and then obviously beyond, like our hormones
Mhm.
are consistently changing. I saw something, it was a meme on Instagram today, and maybe you can tell me if this is true or false, but
Okay.
it said something like our hormones are, they don't come back to like base level, to like our normal level until like 7 years after you have a baby. It was something like your hormones and your physical state, like it takes you 7 years to like come back to kind of yourself. I don't know. It's like, it wasn't by a doctor or anything like that. And I was thinking about that, and I was like, cause Sunny's about to be 7,
Yeah.
and I am like starting to feel just like so much better and lighter. And I was wondering if there was like any truth in that.
Yeah, so interesting. I don't know about the 7-year
Yeah.
statistics. I'm also not a doctor.
Yeah.
But I do know, for example, we see a lot of patients who are like, I gave birth and I'm in the postpartum stage and they're telling me like, things are just out of whack while you're postpartum, but like
Yeah.
I'm a year out and things still feel really out of whack. And what can happen, for example, is you can develop a thyroid condition after pregnancy. Like pregnancy can actually affect your hormones
Hmm.
to the point where, now you have an issue with your thyroid that you didn't have before, or now you have some sort of hormonal imbalance that you didn't have before. And so I don't know about the 7 years, but it is true that actually your hormones get really affected by pregnancy. And it can be really valuable to actually dig into that and to see what's going on, as opposed to
Hmm.
just being like, oh, it's like postpartum and it'll take me a few years to balance. Like there are things you can do in the meantime in
Yeah.
those years that
Yeah.
I think are really valuable.
And what about the mental health piece with like postpartum and women's health?
Mhm.
Is that an angle that you're focusing on?
Yeah, mental health is like so interesting. So what we do know is that women with hormonal conditions have a much higher rate of anxiety and depression than women
Hmm.
who do not have a hormonal condition, which kind of makes sense if you think about it, number one, from the underlying hormonal imbalance, but also number two, if you're spending all of your time running around to doctors and trying to deal with your health and your health doesn't feel in a good place, your mental health is not going to be in a good place either.
Totally.
So to date, the way that we're helping with mental health is again by helping to heal kind of those underlying hormonal health issues. We do help patients with PMDD, for example, or like some patients have, for example, like depression around their period
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
they need help managing.
Yeah.
We are looking to get into more like mental health in terms of therapy. That's something our patients have been asking us for a lot
I'm
because it's so
sure.
clear how much
Hmm.
that tie is. But
Hmm.
so today we're really helping kind of focus on that hormonal underpinning of mental health as opposed to direct mental health care. But that's something we're actually thinking about
Yeah.
expanding into.
But at least it would be someone that was a voice. Like, it sounds like your team
Exactly.
would still be there to listen. Like, I remember after Sunny, like 6 weeks after Sunny, I was just feeling so low and depressed. And like the visions I was having, and I was just like, oh my God. So I called my doctor, and she was like, well, are you having any, and I feel like I've said this story in the podcast before, but she was like, are you having any thoughts of like harming your baby, harming yourself or harming your
Mhm.
baby? And I was like, no, not there, not quite there. And she's like, okay, well then you're fine. Like just take it easy and we'll
Oh,
talk in a month. And then I'm like, okay, like
yeah.
that's the question you ask. And then I'm fine. Like everything else is fine. Do you want to know the other insane like visions I've had of my
Mhm.
child? Like, anyway, so it like even that I could have called my specialist at Allara and they would have had some
Yes,
sort of
100%. And that's why I
recommendation.
always emphasize is like
Yeah.
we want to be a patient's home base in healthcare. So,
Yeah.
even if we, for example, aren't don't have a psychiatrist on staff for you, we'll take your concerns seriously and we'll help you find a psychiatrist or we'll help you find a therapist. I mean, I think that's something that is really missing in the health system too, is somebody who can help you navigate it
Mhm.
because that can be really hard to figure out. Like, who do I go to for this specific thing? Like,
Mhm.
who do I call? How do I get that appointment? The waiting list is 6 months long. Like, how do I get in? And I was diagnosed with PCOS around, I was like in my early 20s. And what I actually found was, especially back then, especially 10 years ago, number one, people were not talking about conditions like PCOS. Like, it is not like it is today where, celebrities are talking about PCOS and Kiki Palmer is putting her acne selfie on Instagram. Like, nobody would talk about it.
Mhm.
So I think number one, I actually felt a lot of like shame and embarrassment and fear around it.
Mhm.
I felt a lot of fear around, like we talked about, like, would I ever be able to get pregnant?
Mhm.
What did this mean for my fertility? Would I gain 100 pounds if I ate sugar? Like, all of these kind of crazy things would run through
Mhm.
my head.
Mhm.
And I think the other tough part was, I wasn't talking to my friends about it. And I also really didn't find a good doctor to talk to about it for a long time.
Mhm.
And so I was that person who was on Instagram and was like looking at every random like tip and trick on Instagram. And for a year, I wasn't eating gluten and dairy. And then I wasn't doing HIIT workouts. And then like I was trying this crazy diet and this supplement. And it just felt like I kept trying all these things and nothing was really working. And I also was kind of making myself miserable along the
Mhm.
way.
Mhm.
So I think that was actually like a big awakening for me that while social media can be great and it can be really great to, help women share their stories and learn more about their condition, you kind of have to take everything on social media with a grain of salt
Yeah.
and also think about what's right for you and your body versus what's right for somebody else.
Mhm.
Because odds are, if it fits into an Instagram caption, like it's probably not universal advice that fits for every single woman in the
Mhm.
entire world.
Mhm.
And so I think for me, what became really valuable over the past like 5 years was number one, speaking to more actual experts. So speaking with my Allara doctor, speaking with my Allara nutritionist, working with my fertility doctor on my egg freezing, and actually listening to the experts as
Yeah.
opposed to like listening to Instagram people.
Yeah, or just your friends or people around you. I feel like even with this fertility stuff, with my infertility, like whenever I start talking about it, I immediately get bombarded with like, well, have you spoken to this person or have you heard of
Hmm.
this or maybe it's this? And then it's like, they care and they're wanting to help you, but it's overwhelming and it makes you confused. And
Yep.
then you don't know where to go with the information. And for me, then I just get stunted and I don't do anything. I'm like, oh my God, this is all too much. I'm just not going to deal with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like a lot of it is very fear based too. Like, I feel like, if you look on social, it almost feels like you have to freeze your eggs at 26 because,
Right.
like,
Well,
otherwise they all
I've
dry up.
even been saying that. Like I did a podcast with a series with CCRM, 6 episode series, and it was
Oh,
amazing. And the doctors, they weren't giving like an age or anything, but they were like a lot of them were saying like the younger the better. But at the same time, all the doctors will say, however, like it's specific for each
right.
individual. So
Yeah.
you have like you
And I
said,
remember showing up to my fertility doctor being like, "Oh my God, I'm 33. Like, am I too late? Did I like miss the
right,
window?"
right.
And he was like, "No, for you with your situation, with your PCOS, with your egg count that I can see in your ultrasound, with your blood work, like you still have plenty of good eggs. You are totally fine at 33." And that
Yeah,
was such a relief that
I
I
bet.
wouldn't have known if I didn't talk to an actual doctor who was looking at my ultrasound and my lab tests and everything. So I think that was big for me. And then along the way, I've also really figured out like what worked for me personally. So for
Yeah.
example, cutting out like dairy and gluten did not work for me. It just drove me crazy. But focusing on like getting protein into every single meal really works for me. And thinking about like how do I balance a meal with
Uh-huh.
protein and fiber if I'm having carbs. Like I don't have just kind of plain carbs on their own.
Mhm.
Things like that have been really helpful. Like walking has been huge for me. I'm obsessed with walking.
Mhm.
But like I feel like, I thought I couldn't run and I couldn't do HIIT workouts because it would like my cortisol, which is not
Not
the
true.
realist of real
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
And last year I ran a marathon, which was the most amazing experience.
Amazing.
So yeah, it was a lot of like trial and error, but I feel like really I finally got to a place that was like, I figured out what works for me.
Mhm.
And I think that's so important for women. Again, regardless of your condition, like it's so personal. You have to figure out what works for you as an individual.
It's so true. And it's like the only way that you're really going to figure that out is with someone that's like looking at the numbers and knowing what's
Yes,
going on inside your body.
exactly.
Yeah. Ugh, I've learned so much. And like this has also helped me like reframe so many things too, especially the piece about the education, like not putting so much pressure on all of us to know everything about
Mhm.
everything and to try to put some onus on the doctors. I'm working with Parallel, which I really want to connect to because Parallel's
Yeah.
doing a lot of great work with making supplements for women of all ages and men too. But they have this Parallel women's the pledge where they're giving $1 million for women's health research. And I'm just like, and I know the research is going into like better care and teaching
Yeah.
doctors and informing them. And so that is so
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. Well, do you want to hear a crazy statistic? Do you know how
Please.
do you know how much research funding went to just PCOS, for example, in 2022?
How much?
$9 million for a condition that affects 1 in 10 women.
That's like
Like, and the year
horrific.
before that, by the way, it was so little funding that it didn't even make the NIH list. So I like we really do need better research in women's healthcare. There also is no on-label FDA medication for PCOS. There's
Hmm.
currently no way of diagnosing endometriosis other than through surgery. Like women's health is light years behind
It's so true.
where it needs to be.
It's so true. My goal is to continue to talk to women like you who are doing just that and tell everyone where they can find Allara and how they can get started.
Yes. So you can find us at allarahealth.com. That's ALLARA health.com. We're also on Instagram and TikTok at Allara Health. And if you want to get started, you can check out our website. And if you have specific questions, we do a bunch of live Q&As where you can learn more about it, find out if we take your insurance. We take insurance in a bunch of states.
It's
And so we
amazing.
made it as easy as possible to get really great expert care from the comfort of your home.
Amazing. When did you launch this?
We launched in 2021. So we're about 3 years old
3
now.
years old. Amazing. And it's just also so interesting because you come from a family of doctors and you even didn't know exactly where to start or where to go,
Yeah.
you know?
And
So
I mean, that was partially why I started. I thought if I, who, has an MBA, has all this like education, my dad's a
yeah.
doctor, I have great insurance. If I can't get good medical care, like what hope do a lot of people have? And so I really felt like a responsibility to help fix this problem.
Yeah. Well, thank you so, 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 so much.
Oh my gosh, thank you. This was awesome. I appreciate the time and getting to be on the podcast.
Same. And I'm going to sign up. I want to do like a whole new set of labs and everything.
Oh
And
yeah, we
yeah.
can take care of all that for you for
Okay,
sure.
cool. Okay. You're the best. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you. It's so nice to meet you.
You too.